So, in what ways has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the U.S. and how can we limit these effects? By Lionel Franklin,
Elvis Fisher, Ronald O'Brien.
Can we restart that?
Nope, just keep going.
So, although we have lived through a majority of the COVID pandemic, we do not have enough information about it to really reflect and research on what really happened. A way we can help increase our knowledge about this is to reflect on the disease epidemics from the past. According to Brill.com, quote, the Black Death was considered to be a major factor in the closure of the east-west trade routes during the 1300s, end quote. Similar to the Black Death, COVID isolated nations during its epidemic, and the reason why I brought this up is because we can see how the Black Death isolated nations and did not allow for any cultural diffusion during that time. In Gulish Choskan's peer-reviewed article, he says, quote, the effect of cultural diffusion is changing local cultures, changing beliefs and ideas, creating new services, products, and jobs, and improving the overall quality of life, end quote. His quote shows us that how, without cultural diffusion, most human progress comes to a stop. And now we all can agree on the fact that 2 years without any social interaction really hit us hard. According to an article by Science Direct, quote, COVID is affecting psychiatry in ways that are evolving. Existing psychiatric patients are being faced with isolation, loneliness, sudden bereavement without being able to bury the dead, losing their livelihood, and fear of ultimately losing their lives. This shows us how isolation has left America in shambles, and there are only a few ways that we can cope with the past.
One major solution we had to this problem of isolation would be to create a vaccine. And the parameters we decided around this vaccine was that it would have to be created quickly, as past vaccinations took months to create, causing the effect of the vaccine to worsen, to not heal the disease as quickly, and create an isolation problem developed in those months without a vaccination. Another thing we decided our vaccine would have to have, it would have to be highly effective. For example, in a study comparing unvaccinated and vaccinated men, the study said the relative risk comparing unvaccinated to fully vaccinated persons was 7.8%, corresponding to a vaccine effectiveness of 87.1%. So what this means is that most vaccines are upwards or equal to 90% effectiveness. And our vaccine would have to have at least this high effectiveness to get the people's attention and be an effective solution to this problem. Finally, vaccine would have to outweigh, its pros would have to outweigh its cons. As if it didn't do that, it would kind of just be useless. If the cons outweighed the pros, it would be an ineffective vaccine. Next slide, please. So what are the pros of a vaccination? One pro is that vaccines are effective in helping our bodies handle the diseases presented. As we know, vaccines have always been effective in healing our bodies from diseases, and have been a good source of bettering our health so that we may be in a more social society. Another thing vaccines do that other solutions or other medicines may not be capable of is that they are effective in dealing with variants of the disease they are intended, and are also somewhat effective in handling other diseases. As we can see with this graph, the vaccine effectiveness against any infection over time is still relatively high. And as we can see with these studies, it still remains above 75% with any infection, and that's not including a COVID disease. That is including all infections. So it still remains a viable solution in helping with other diseases. Another thing a vaccine would help with is that it would decrease societal isolation. Many companies and organizations are less hesitant to let their employees and workers out if they're unvaccinated or not vaccinated with the vaccine. For example, in a journal discussing NFL players and rules implemented for vaccinated people, it said, fully vaccinated persons with COVID-19 were permitted to return to work once they were asymptomatic or fever-free, and experiencing improving symptoms within 24 hours. So what this means is that vaccinated people were allowed to return to work in one of the biggest businesses in America much quicker than the unvaccinated employees. Now, what are the cons of our solution would be that vaccines have always come with a lot of controversy, whether that be conspiracy theories about them, a society that is not believing in the government and what they're putting. The idea of putting something into your body or injecting a fluid can really knock some people's minds off. So a vaccine will always have some sort of controversy. Another con is that vaccines have held unknown effects. Many of the unknown effects may not be true, but for example, when a COVID-19 vaccine was distributed to epileptic people in a study, it said in total 8.7% people expressed that they were not willing to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. 302 patients, 92.35%, did not experience any increase in the seizure frequency, whereas 7.65% has a seizure worsening. What this means is that although it's only 8% of the people who experienced a seizure worsening, or after they got the vaccine, their epileptic seizures worsened, although that's only 8%, that's a very high, and 92% did not feel anything, it still shows some concern for the unknown effects and how it could worsen certain people. Next slide, please. So what are some of the limitations of distributing a vaccine? Would be that it's very difficult to distribute. For example, in this graph, we can see that low-income people are almost impossible. It's almost impossible for them to get a vaccine distributed to them. And although it increases for higher-income people, there's still a lot of people of the lower income who are not able to receive a vaccine due to their own wealth. And this can create a problem with the vaccine, because if low income, which is a high percentage of our society, is unable to get it, then we are unable to let most of the people back into society, and we're losing a lot of our people because they're unable to get vaccinated. Another problem would be creation. As I discussed earlier, our vaccine would need to be created quickly, and that can cause problems because it's very difficult to create a vaccine within 1 or 2 months within an immediate response of the disease. So that would be a huge limitation. And a third limitation is people's hesitancy towards the vaccine. According to a study held by the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care, a total of 121, 52% of people who were aged more than 30 years, 118% were male participants, 100 or 43% were paramedics by occupation, had contracted COVID infection. 202, 87% had received information, education, and communication regarding COVID vaccine. More than the ones aged more than 30 years old who did not receive any education about the vaccine had higher scores of vaccine hesitancy, and the difference was statistically significant, indicating a vaccine hesitancy. So what this means is that many people were hesitant to get the vaccine, and maybe this is because they were uneducated on it, or another problem, but this still creates a problem of hesitancy to get the vaccine. And finally, some of the implications of implementing it was that it would have to be vastly accepted. Even if it meets all these requirements, still the majority of people would have to accept the fact that they would need to get a vaccine. And it would also require the world to unite to create a vaccine against a disease like this in a short amount of time. Next slide.
Our analysis of Solution 2 overall stated the idea of giving American voters the ability to be more involved in voting for laws for what they receive as treatment from COVID. By implementing this solution, we will start to view the virus as a battle fought together, rather than by two sides. In a study done by Talia Courtney from the Department of Community Health, she states that, quote, among 908 participants, 75.2 engaged in social distancing, 94.4% were willing/able to self-quarantine, and 60.1% intended to get vaccinated. When people come together to fight a common cause, they tend to think the same because they're all trying to find a common goal. Next slide, please. On the other hand, a negative to this solution is that the government, unfortunately, would never give this much power to the people. When we vote for laws, our representatives do not seem to make a difference. Secondly, without having citizens vote for laws against COVID, we start to see a split in what we believe and division in society. A quote from Nora Kenworthy from the University of Washington, Bothell, Adam D. Kuhn from Johns Hopkins University, and Emily Mendenhall from Georgetown University all state that divisive leadership has turned the American COVID-19 response into a polarizing contest of entrenched value structures, even though COVID-19 continues to strain economic and social support systems. To sum everything up, some pros are that there was a shared goal in the fact that Americans have more independence in what they decide to consume. The cons, however, are that the government will not let this happen because they want all the power and control. Finally, another con is that with the current division in today's society dealing with COVID, giving more power to the people honestly harms the integrity of the United States and its leaders. Next slide, please.
Now, let's move on to comparing our two solutions. Vaccines have been proven to work, and humans have already gone through the process of creating them. According to the Mayo Clinic, COVID vaccines were 91% effective. This increases protection for both vaccinated and unvaccinated people due to an increase in herd immunity. But there are some downsides to this solution. One is that the process is extremely costly and lengthy. According to Marcus 23, COVID vaccines cost the federal government $30 billion to produce. And that's not counting the countries and companies that also help to make vaccines. And according to Solis Moreira 21, the COVID vaccine took 1 year to produce. But when thousands of people were dying each day, it put the risk of many lives at more risk. Also, there was a very tough distribution process. According to Tai et al., vaccine hesitancy, misinformation, and barriers to access led to an unequal distribution, especially between Black and Latino populations. This made it so that the vaccine wasn't able to reach everyone, and it was less effective than it could have been. And let's not forget to mention that the US was extremely lucky because, unlike others, they got the vaccine before underdeveloped and third world countries. Now, let's move on to our second solution. Voting can unify Americans to fight a disease so that everyone can make a difference, and laws will reach everyone. According to my partner's poll, there was an extremely large incentive to eradicate disease because it's in everyone's best interest to do so. But there are some downsides to this as well. Many people may not know what's best for them compared to how experts do. For example, if politicians and citizens came together to create a law that was against mandatory or encouraged vaccines, this could be actually counterintuitive because, as we said, vaccines are beneficial to limiting the spread of disease. Next slide, please. As a result, we believe that vaccines would best limit the spread of disease if another outbreak like COVID-19 were to occur again. This is because vaccines have been proven to be effective and we know that they work. Although the process is lengthy and costly, it's completely worth it because we know that it's more feasible than voting. Due to the tangible evidence, the best chance that we have to stop the spread of disease and limit its impact is through vaccination. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I got a few questions for you, and then we'll wrap this up. Okay, we'll just go in the order that you guys are in right there. So, Lionel, you'll be first. So Lionel, how did the group decide to use Elvis's perspective in your conclusions or resolutions to your issue? What role did Elvis's perspective play in that?
So Elvis's perspective was on the historical context of COVID, and we really used that in our conclusions by referring back to the Black Death, because that was a major disease epidemic from the past, and that could show us how diseases from the past have these repercussions, and these repercussions are actually similar to today. And we use that to kind of analyze the Black Death versus COVID and how we can use it to we can get a lesson from it.
Perfect. Elvis, if you guys had another team member, a fifth one, what lens do you think you would give them, and why do you think that would have helped your final presentation?
I think if we had a fifth member, we could probably use a societal or cultural lens, because a lot of our presentation was the isolation of the people. So if we had someone who like did a cultural thing and how the epidemic may have affected all our culture and our society, it would have maybe been helpful in helping us with our presentation and helping us understand why isolation is such a bad thing for our culture.
Okay, terrific, terrific. Let's see, Rye, give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of reading Tejas's paper. Like, what did Tejas's paper do to the way you thought about this problem?
So Tejas's paper really focused on economy and the economics of it. And I didn't really recognize that politics and legislature could be a solution to an epidemic. Since my lens mostly focused on scientific, I was looking for a lot of scientific evidence, and Tejas's opened me up to the legislature and politics of it.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, and then last, Tejas, what's an example of a compelling argument from one of these guys' papers that didn't make it into the presentation, and kind of why didn't it if it was compelling?
So Elvis had a very compelling argument about the Spanish flu, but instead we decided to include the Black Death in the introduction because the Spanish flu didn't have the same impact as the Black Death did, and the Black Death's impacts were very similar to how COVID constrained our society, and it just really didn't fit into the paper.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys.